Hope you're feeling better, Raymond.
I am much better. Thank you very much.
Good, good.
Yes.
I think recovering from the pneumonia was harder than recovering from COVID.
Oh, that's what it was.
Yeah, I had both.
Oh, well, I don't have an experience with COVID. I do have experience with pneumonia, and yeah, that's not fun.
Either one of them was much fun. I'm just thankful and blessed that I recovered and feel mostly healthy.
Good.
I have the antibodies.
I have the antibodies.
Yeah. Do we have Sam on it by any chance?
I don't see him
yet. Randy, everything working okay?
Looks like it. Just make sure the slide's advanced. Everybody see the slide advanced?
Yep.
Yes.
So I'm going to go ahead before we call to order, just to remind everybody, if you're on and you're not a presenter or a board member, you just keep your mic muted. And for the board members, you know, just if you're not speaking, mute your mic to avoid background noise. You also can use the raise hand function. Remember, in order to do that, you have to click on that participants button in order to see the little raised hand function. And then it looks like everybody's using their camera, which is great. We like to do that for public interface, and that's all I have. I think we are.
Great.
Good morning. This is a special called meeting of the Board of Directors for our Transformation Initiative kickoff meeting on August 7th, 2020 at 8:31 a.m. Transformation Initiative kickoff. Nicole.
Thank you. Well, thank you in advance to everybody for attending today's specially called meeting. It was really important for us to kick off the Transformation Initiative, ensure that the board is engaged throughout the process, and everyone is on the same page at the very beginning. And so that's really the purpose of today. We are going to have Accenture go through kind of 4 main areas, and it will be open for Q&A, so the board is welcome to ask any questions that they have. Accenture will be talking about the phases of work, the needs that they have of DCTA staff, like data requests. They'll be talking about the cadence of reporting and the types of reporting, as well as kind of some recommendations on the overall project management. Our goal at the end of this meeting is, 1, to ensure that everybody is on the same page and is comfortable with the path forward, but also to make sure that the board is comfortable with the reporting structure and the types of reports that are going to be available, and how often you will receive those reports and what type of reports, whether they're written or a presentation from Accenture, as well as some directive to staff regarding the management of the project from the administrative side. So in your packet, we have provided some supporting materials that most of them you have seen before. So Exhibit 1 is just the original scope, which was approved by the board. I just pulled out the scope of work from the actual RFP. Exhibit 2 is Accenture's original response, which the board has seen before. Exhibit 3 is Accenture's best and final offer. So the evaluation committee did go back to Accenture and ask for a few modifications, and so that's been included. And then Exhibit 4 is going to be the newest component, and that really is just a quick glance at 2 items that the board has asked DCTA staff to look at, and that in reviewing the scope of work for the Transformation Initiative, we felt that it was best for Accenture to provide that information. And Accenture has confirmed that they're able to provide those 2 things within the scope and within the budget that the board has approved. And those two items are DCTA's compliance efforts as well as the administrative overhead research. And so on page 70 of your packet, it's just a super high level confirmation of those items, as well as an email confirmation that Accenture can accommodate them within the existing scope. After today's meeting, staff will begin to collect the data that Accenture is requesting, and we'll start to send that over next week. And then we'll also be working with Brandy to reach out to the board members, and that is the comprehensive board, to schedule 1 hour one-on-one sessions with Accenture as part of the first phase of the project. And so for the 5 voting board members, your meetings will include both you and your alternate during that meeting with Accenture. So those are just some of the administrative things. But with that, I would really like to introduce Chris Newport. He's a project manager with Accenture and is going to be the lead on this project. And I will kick it over to Chris to kind of go through the presentation that he has put together.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. It is our privilege to be here with you virtually. We'd prefer to be in person, obviously. But I'll kick off what we hope to be a good, vibrant discussion. Please feel free to interject as we move throughout the presentation. We have, we're not going to try to kill you first thing on Friday morning with slideware, but we have a few pieces of content here just to anchor the conversation and give you a broad overview of our perspective on the project and give us the opportunity to talk a little bit about how we're going to approach this partnership with you. So I think what I'd like to do first is kick it over to Rob Cohan. Rob is going to be the executive that's responsible and accountable for this engagement, and we'll have the opportunity to introduce the members of the team to you, and then we'll walk through a bit of the process and the approach and what you can expect. So I think, Brandy, we could go to the next slide and I'll turn it over to Rob.
All right, thanks, Chris. Well, good morning, and very happy to be here today. The team's super excited to get this kicked off, and on behalf of Accenture, thank you very much. We are very excited to be involved in this partnership and this project with everyone. What I want to do real quick is just kind of talk about the way we've organized our thoughts here and to go through the discussion, and certainly you know, as we go along through the content and the material, if there's questions or things that you want to ask us or the team, certainly feel free to do so. We at the end certainly want to have Q&A, and I think as Chris touched on, this is the kickoff, and we'll right after this go right into one-on-one and discussions. So the way we've organized our agenda is really just want to have a few minutes to touch on the team. So who are the leads for this project overall, and as well for each of the individual work areas. Just kind of spend a few minutes, I'll reflect on this, talk about kind of our understanding and re-baseline on the mission of the project and what we understand we are going to set out to accomplish here. Chris is he's going to go through in a bit more detail the approach, so you can see how kind of we've mechanized that into the overall project plan and the key steps, and most importantly, perhaps, is how we're going to come together with you. Certainly, we look at this as a project together, where we're coming together to drive this out. It's certainly not something we're going to do to you, we're going to do with you. And we're going to talk about how that plays out in kind of a partnerial or partnership approach. So we'll reflect on that in the midsection here of the materials, and certainly looking forward to any feedback, comments, or counsel from you as a result of that. Next steps, we'll talk a little bit more about next steps and key success factors. Not a lot of detail there, but the big things that we've seen in doing these types of projects previously that we feel are really key to being successful. And then if there's any questions on other details, certainly we've got other materials that we can get into as well. All right, so with that, why don't I kick over to the next slide here, and just as we get started, just talk about our team for a few minutes. A little bit about myself. I'm the overall executive. I handpicked this team as well as companies for you. I spent quite a bit of time reflecting on the requirements and what we understood to be some of the challenges and opportunities for DCTA as we pick this team. Certainly looking at it through the lenses of, service delivery, finance, governance, and HR, as well as technology. So there, when we went through this process, and we'll talk here in a few minutes about this, we did pick another company to help us on the service side, Cambridge Systematics. They're going to talk a little bit, Dahlia and Scott, about how they're going to go about, doing the assessment and recommendations with regard to service. I've got Carrie Sabity. She'll introduce herself in a few minutes, who's going to lead the financial side, and then Ryan Callison for technology. Chris and myself will be working on governance and organization, and then just the overall integration of all the work streams to make sure it comes together as one. My background, a little bit over 26 years working inside of government, public transportation, various public service type of organizations, based here in Austin, Texas. I'm a CPA by trade, so started my career working in public service, worked for John Montford in the Senate, as well as John Sharp, and then worked in audit a little bit before I went into management consulting and technology system integration work. So this is the kind of thing I've done for quite a long time, and most recently been working on a number of transit authorities, DOTs, et cetera, as they're trying to really figure out how to operate in 2020 and beyond, and certainly what we can talk about that in terms of our point of view. You may have seen in our proposal some of the more innovative technology plays that are out there for transportation authorities. Been involved in one here recently, a big one as well, really taking a hard look at how can we leverage platforms and technologies to streamline operations, become more efficient and effective. And certainly we understand that to be a big part of the mission for this project. So my job is to really make sure this comes together in a meaningful, actionable roadmap for you, that we have recommendations that are specific to DCTA, not universal or applicable to somebody else, but not you. So really making sure that what we do here comes together in a meaningful way to drive transformation for DCTA. So with that, I'm going to let Chris Newport introduce himself, and then just give the team a little bit of time to introduce each one of them and their backgrounds for the various areas. So Chris, why don't I kick back over to you?
Thanks, Rob. Good morning again, everyone. My name is Chris Newport. As in the role of project manager, I'll be the primary point of contact for the board and the staff for the day-to-day execution of the work, and partnership with you all, along with all the different logistics that are going to go into performing the work with you and the team on the staff on a day-to-day basis. So I'm on Rob's team in our Accenture public sector strategy and consulting practice, focusing on local government. Prior to joining Accenture, I spent just around 10 years either in or around local government, primarily in the Houston region, to include some transit work. It's been about 5 years in one of the larger departments. It was an internal consulting function, more or less, for the city of Houston, spending most of the time focusing on how to improve citizen service delivery outcomes. And then spent my last 2 years at the city of Houston as Mayor Anise Parker's chief of staff, and had the fun opportunity to move on and work on Super Bowl 51 as chief of staff, chief operating officer for the Houston Super Bowl host committee, before I moved on to this journey with Accenture. So I think I will pitch it over to James Callison to give a little bit of his background.
Pleasure to meet you all. My name is James Callison. I'm coming out of college. I'm in my third year with Accenture, where I've been basically entirely in the health and public service practice, and I've developed about 2 years of experience helping 5 different states and the federal government on things from program and policies they could implement to budget and organization questions around operations and governance. Really excited to continue this work. I'll be working primarily as Chris's kind of right-hand man and helping a lot with the day-to-day structure for each one of the towers we've set up in our operations. I'll pass it over to Scott to introduce himself.
Hi, folks. I'm Scott Boone. I'm with Cambridge Systematics, working out of our Austin, Texas office. Been here for about 5 years, almost entirely as a transit and shared mobility specialist. I've gotten to work with agencies across Texas, the Southeast, and coast to coast. Usually working on service delivery, performance analysis, market analytics. So here working with Dahlia to really shine a light on some of the day-to-day transit service delivery statistics, as well as take a little bit more of a big picture look at how those will serve us going forward.
So I'm Dahlia Levin. As Scott said, I'm also with Cambridge Systematics. I am our national planning lead for transit and shared mobility, which means I do a lot of work on operational planning, but also sort of strategic thinking for transit agencies around the country. I'm actually based right outside DC. So I guess I'm lucky I got to sleep in a little later than the rest of you this morning. But we're going to be leading the service analysis tasks, but also thinking about how those play into other decisions that we make about finance, about technology, and about governance.
All right,
Hi
Perry.
there, everyone. My name is Perry Savity. I'm from Accenture, and I am not Rowan Miranda, whom you may have met earlier. Rowan actually I was a client of Accenture, and Rowan was on my engagement to help me build out a business case for a major ERP. But I am substituting for Rowan. I am a former budget director from the state of Ohio. I've spent about 25 years in the public service and finance and IT. I've done work across the country on financial sustainability as it relates to government. Actually, it's really interesting, Dahlia and Scott, that you brought up some of your work on demographics, because in my past, I worked at the Brookings Institution, the Metropolitan Policy Project, and funded Scott Bernstein's Housing Transportation Affordability Index, which was all about how do you locate transit where you're making neighborhoods more affordable. So I'm excited to be working with you folks on this project, and very excited to be in Denton County. Ryan, over to you.
Thank you, Perry. Yes, Ryan Callison with Accenture. I am going to be the technology analysis task lead. I have about 17 years of experience doing technology strategy, smart city, technology portfolio optimization, process optimization kind of work for state and local government, a lot of county work, a lot of city work, some work with transportation, transit agencies as well. Really excited to be a part of the team. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Ryan. And Chris, I think that's the main team that we've got on the phone for the Denton County folks. So I think that, so we do have here at the bottom, I'll just reflect on this for a minute, number of subject matter experts. Accenture is quite a large company, as that you probably read or know from the proposal, which the good news is there's a number of experts around the world, and certainly here in the US, that we can draw from for various issue areas or opportunity areas. And so a number of those have been reflected here. And so while we have a main sort of team in front of you, the key leads, if you will, the support people are going to be critical as well, and be plugging in as needed throughout the project. All right, so with that, I think we'll move to the next slide real quick. All right, so just to kind of re-baseline on the kind of key sort of objectives, if you will, of the project, and certainly read through the RFP, obviously, in detail, spent a lot of time reflecting on not only the RFP, but just the fair amount of public research that we've done, as well as global best practices, other projects we've been engaged in, particularly in transportation recently. And so the way we are looking at this engagement and work with you is through these lenses. So I'll just kind of touch on them real quick, but as we start working towards what's innovation and transformation mean, and how does that translate into DCTA specifically, obviously service delivery very critical in how you deliver service in the future. You heard from some of our leads there previously on this, but what does service in a transform model look like? What kind of investments or changes should you be thinking about? What are our recommendations in that way? And certainly we'll be working again with you to work through this, but service overall and what kind of smart bets and how service will be delivered into the future is obviously a critical component of this. We talked a little bit about the financial aspects of really getting into the finance and the budget area, and the policies and processes, and as well as, I would suggest technologies as well. And what does that need to look like? What kind of recommendations do we have? I know there's a number of items there that were part of your procurement and the objectives you had in the procurement. I think what Perry and I and Chris are going to do is sit down with you. The way we sort of settled this out in the BAFO is kind of left it open for us to kind of dial in a few of these areas. So there were a number of things on the financial side that I think we wanted to make sure that we got right for you. And so there's some further work there just to lock down, make sure we've got the objective set straight. But the financial area, obviously very critical. Moving on into technology there down at the bottom right. So how do we really think about platforms, modern technologies, as a service capabilities? There's a tremendous amount of technology available to drive transformation, digital transformation in particular for the private sector obviously is there and been doing it. The government is absolutely working on it. Transportation now is absolutely racing and embracing the technology platforms to try to drive efficiencies and help make service delivery more effective. So we're going to be taking a hard look at technology, what I would say top to bottom through the front to mid and back office, and really trying to bring you a point of view and ultimately obviously recommendations around this. So technology, platform-centric capability is certainly a very important piece of this. Going into governance and organization, now this is the one area where, yep, we're going to do the assessment, bring you the recommendations and the roadmap. I would say the dive is not going to be as deep. There's been some work here already that we understand we can pull from and draw upon. And so for governance and organization, we're going to be working pretty close with you to make sure make sure we get this right. But what action should DCTA take to enable the leadership, sustain the workforce? What's the workforce need to look like, et cetera? We know this is a key part of it, and certainly overall a work stream. Ultimately, how are we going to impact the community, the citizens, the customers that we serve? What's the best way to drive outcomes for them? Not only from a mobility standpoint, but obviously, reflecting kind of and making sure we're reflecting on air quality, economic development, and livability as well. So, as we think about the project, it's a very kind of simple slide. I know these are complex areas in their own right, but this is how we're thinking about the project overall. And of course, you've heard from the team here, the team leads, and we've really organized ourselves around this as well to make sure we've got team members that are accountable, working through each one of these pieces, and more importantly, working with you directly on these as well. Chris is going to talk about the project schedule in a few minutes, and the timeline. So the 3-month kind of timeline is a go fast model, I would say. I would assume you probably agree with us on that. So we've had to program this such that we can do that with you, and Chris is going to get into the details of that. But But at any rate, the way this team's been organized and the way I selected the team was to make sure we could cover down on these pieces and do a really great job for you in a 3-month period. All right. So that's our understanding, obviously 30,000-foot view, but our baseline understanding of what our mission is here. Next slide, please. All right, so why don't we kind of just double click into this a little bit, and I'll let the team kind of speak to these pieces, you know, talking about the path forward, and just kind of go through them a little bit more detail. So for service, I'm going to kick it over to Dahlia.
Sure. And so our approach to this whole project is really focused on thinking about what the region, what the board, what staff view as the vision for DCTA moving forward. And so how we answer a bunch of different questions plays into what the recommendations are. And so we think about questions and sort of in the form of trade-offs is what are the services we can offer that are best going to serve the customers? And, you know, we can look at a bunch of different models for offering service, everything from fixed route bus routes to the rail service that you guys already have, but thinking about some of these emerging business models that might work well. We know you're very interested in some of those more innovative offerings. So thinking about how we deal with ride hailing or mobility as a service, how can we best implement demand response services? Those sorts of things will have an impact on the other 3 categories that we're looking at as well. So the types of service that we decide are the best options to operate in the Denton County area are going to impact, you know, what technology needs are, how the finances play out. We can also think of it from a governance perspective, is how does DCTA see its role moving forward? Are we thinking about it only as a service operator? Is DCTA going to be more of an orchestrator of mobility in the region? And so these are all things we can think about that have sort of these trade-offs. You can't be all of these things necessarily, and you can't do them all well and efficiently. So thinking about how we make those decisions and how those play into the vision that you all see for your agency is how we come around to answer these.
Rob, I think you are on mute.
Sorry about that, y'all. All right, yes, I was on mute. All right, so just kind of close out this, and I've already kind of touched on a number of these things already, and the team has, but again, coming back to the community vision and really kind of begin with the end in mind type thing, right? It's really pulling all these pieces together across, you know, service, governance, financial technology to do so. Obviously, a lot of questions that we have to get through here with you to work through the assessment piece next, as well as, and Chris is going to talk about some of the visioning as well. So with this, I think, Chris, why don't I hand it over to you, and let's kind of get into the approach a little bit.
Thanks, Rob. Brandy, I think we can go to the next slide. So I want to spend a little bit of time on this slide to both give an overview of the approach that we've laid out, but then also give you a chance to hear from the leads for each of the work streams, just to give a brief perspective on what you can expect working with them and the key aspects that they see in performing the assessments and then developing actionable recommendations for DCTA coming out of as they move into recommendation identification. So as Rob said, we proposed a 12-week duration here for this initial phase of work with you. The first phase, planning and visioning, is all about identifying the key issues and areas and opportunities for you know, what the key tasks and priorities for DCTA, both the board and the executive leadership of the organization are, culminating in a visioning workshop that digests the time that we'll spend together in interviews and analyzing the data that we'll get back from the team to say what the future and North Star for DCTA is in the future. And that transitions into the current state assessment, which to deliver on a 12-week project timeline. Each of these work streams and analysis of service, organization and governance, finance, and technology will be run in parallel. And that will be the same as we move into phase 3. Again, another parallel process building on both phase 1 and phase 2, identify actionable opportunities and steps that DCTA can take to optimize the service and the way in which it delivers service to the customers that it serves in the communities of North Texas. And then finally, 2-week period in phase 4 to consolidate the agency-wide findings and actionable recommendations that we would make, as well as function-specific process improvements and opportunities that DCTA might take advantage of, and deliver a roadmap, as it were, for how you can move through into implementation of the recommendations. I think at the end of the day, what we're hoping to deliver with you is a flexible way of working and a flexible partnership model with us. I think the timeline is aggressive. We feel, and I think the evaluation committee and the board agreed that the circumstances dictate an aggressive timeline. It deserves it, and it's something that DCTA is capable of meeting. So with that, I'll stop there and just invite in, I think Dahlia and Scott first, if you'd like to offer any observations or comments regarding the approach to the service assessment.
Yeah, so I think our approach to the service assessment is really going to pivot off of this data request. It's always an exciting time to kind of dive in and see what data are available, what data that we have the new chance to uncover, and identify gaps in the data and reporting structure. And so what we'll do is take a very nuts and bolts approach to evaluating the service performance, both over geographic context, with an eye to who's using the service, different geographics, different demographics, and really start to build a data foundation for the rest of the work. A lot of the questions, kind of the big questions that were set up in the RFP, and I think that will be reflected probably in our conversation with the board today. This is where we'll start to frame out our approach to being able to provide a really solid fact basis to allow our experts to come in and start to deliver a little bit more nuanced and strategic approach to putting that service in place in the future.
Perry, would you like to comment on the budget finance work stream?
Yes, thank you very much. So on budget and finance, as Rob pointed out, my understanding is
Perry, you cut out.
Hi, can you hear me now? I was on double mute.
You got.
Can you hear me now? Okay,
Yeah.
Sorry about that. As Rob pointed out, our work in this area is a little bit vague right now because I think we as a team with you have not focused totally on what we see as the scope of this work. My understanding is that there are concerns around depreciation policy, how that rolls out across the organization, so a non-cash item. And there are concerns about the reserve policy that DCTA has today and its implications for the financial sustainability, not only of the organization, but also of your member municipalities that are part of the Transit Association. So I think that's something we'll definitely want to work on, but want to get a better sense through our interviews with you of the exact shape of those concerns. And some other areas you may be grappling with that I think we could assist with. I'm working on a lot of stimulus funding under the CRF and a number of other CARES Act programs in a number of other states, that might be something worth looking at as well. But I think what we'll start with is a discussion with the key folks that are part of the commission board, concerned about the financial analysis, understand what the group that I believe is engaged already, ELAC is the I heard, is doing already, so that we are not being redundant to work they've already done, but we're providing you some added value. Happy to take questions if there are any.
Okay. Mr. Ryan Callison, do you want to speak a bit to the technology?
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Chris. So on the technology work stream, it really starts with that North Star visioning workshop, really understanding from you all what your vision is, where the guiding principles are. It's also very tightly linked to the other lines, particularly the service line, because while technology is important, it's there to support the business, right? So we want to understand how it's all interconnected and your vision for it. From a discovery perspective, we are going to look at your business strategy, your technology strategy, if that's available, your in-flight and planned projects, as well as getting a look at your current technology portfolio, particularly your application portfolio. And so a lot of that current state analysis is going to be looking at, you know, what are your technology needs to support your vision, as well as where are the gaps within your application technology portfolio, where are areas that portfolio could be enhanced to better serve your mission. And so as we go through this process, we'll be you know, having checkpoints with you along the way, and interviews and things like that, but looking at confirming your current state, then starting to talk about what are the future initiatives or capabilities that you need to address your needs, and then finally moving that into more of a prioritized roadmap to deliver you know, the future state. So excited to be here and ready to get started.
Thanks, gang. Just a few other comments on this slide, and then I'd like to see if there's any questions or comments or observations from the board or from staff. This is a somewhat meaty slide, and we've been doing a lot of talking, but I think two highlights, as Perry indicated, you know, we've in the course of the conversations with the team as we developed our best and final, understand that the scope as it was published in the RFP needed to be adjusted for a couple of different reasons: changing circumstances, number one. Number two, some of the work the team felt was adequate, and we could leverage work that was previously done. For instance, the compensation study that was performed last fiscal year, and in other cases, Raymond and his team have undertaken some of the work, for example, that was previously contemplated in the RFP and the budget and finance work stream. So we've modified that to really emphasize and dig deep in the service and technology areas, and impacts that improved approaches or new process or tools could have on DCTA's ability to deliver service and ultimately positive outcomes that align with the organization's vision. So we've modified this. We still feel this is absolutely achievable in 12 weeks, and we're excited to get working with you all. But let's pause there, check in with you all. Any comments or questions on this slide or anything that we've covered so far?
Chris, Mayor, do you have your hand up?
I do. I know I move my hands around a lot, so it's sort of like an auction. Yeah. I got a couple of questions on this because I'd heard one of the speakers say that there was some concern, or that they wanted to look at depreciation and financial sustainability. And this may go along with my next question. That is, when you talk about the change in scope of work from the RFP, I know that we had some conversations about that in the board meeting, the last two board meetings. And I thought the last one that we had decided that because some had said that we wanted to change the scope and we didn't know what we were wanting to change it to, but I thought in the end it was pretty much left the same that it was. So I'm trying to understand exactly what's changed and if the comment about depreciation and sustainability, I don't remember having those kind of conversations, at least at the board level, as far as those concerns. So I'm trying to understand some of that direction.
Well, and if I can, Mayor, if I could just add,
Sure.
excuse me, the evaluation committee went through the scope of work in detail with Accenture. And that is any modifications that were made to the scope of work were identified in the BAFO. We brought that to the board in June, right? June.
Right.
Brought that to the board, and with the thought that DCTA staff wanted to go through the scope of work to see if there were any changes beyond what was brought to the board for approval. At that point in time, staff said, we do not recommend any other changes. So what the board approved and the information in the original bid plus the BAFO were the only modifications that were made.
Okay, all right.
Any modifications or further discussion about that scope would have happened at the evaluation committee level.
Okay, all right. So then what we were talking, what Chris just mentioned as some of the changes of scope were included, had already been included in those prior discussions with the evaluation committee prior to the board getting that, those recommendations or those ideas about. All right. So then
yes,
my last question, my last question is, and this maybe goes to the scope, is part of the scope and Accenture's work is, to look at how we want to accomplish these tasks with what we have on the ground, but also to be able to give us recommendations of, we think that there's some opportunities for some very radical is probably not the right word, but major shifts that would really meet the needs of our communities and our citizens that maybe is not necessarily within how we're doing it right now. In other words, do you have a full permission to go, okay, we're going to look at this, not starting over obviously, but if we come up with something that is really different than what you think you need or what you think you want, but we believe it is absolutely a practice that needs to be considered. Is that within the scope? Is that part of this?
I could certainly take that question, and Chris, you can kind of fill in. Absolutely. So, we are assuming that the degree or level of change that you're seeking is really transformational and not incremental, meaning potentially some big changes. And so we haven't biased or presupposed anything, frankly, in terms of the degree and the extent of the change. It's kind of, there's no sort of preconceived idea on how big or how far we want to go with change. So I think that's why when you look at this approach and what have you, we really need to come together with you to get a sense for that. Obviously, that's going to be the first task at hand here. But yeah, no sort of notion around incremental or size of change or anything like that.
All right, that's very helpful. Thank you. That ends my questions. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Cesar?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Some of my observations as I'm looking at the timeline, and it's kind of been echoed by Rob, by Chris, when they say it's an aggressive timeline or it's a go fast timeline. And as I read this and I'm looking at this, I see that we're going to have something on the order of 10 workshops, interviews. I'm a little concerned that we may be moving too fast to allow for the team to really do a deep dive, to really provide a thoughtful analysis of of all the issues. And that's just a concern observation that I want to just put out there, just that we may be moving too fast. And I'll just leave it that for the rest of the board to consider.
Well, what I'd like to say is that the board, committee had put together a list of questions and concerns that we wanted to bring to Accenture. And actually that was one of them. It was, is there some concern that the timeline for the project is so short? While this is attractive, what expectations do you have to meet this timeline? So certainly the committee wanted to address that specific issue. And I'll let Robert or go ahead and address how y'all responded to that.
Chris, you want to, I'll kind of kick that over to you as the project manager, and then I can make some comments that
Hey, Chris.
need.
Okay, thanks, Rob. Thank you, Mr. Molina, for the question. I think that concern is the primary reason that in the first phase we begin with dedicated time, not only with the members of the board, but also the leaders of the functional area of the agency to understand, as the mayor said, what opportunities exist from each individual's perspective, what obstacles might exist to realizing the opportunities, and really just that begins the conversation, along with a review of the responses to the initial data request, allows us to identify quickly either large areas of opportunity, large gaps that might exist, and that informs the rest of the time that we have during the project to really zero in on the high impact areas and the areas of the agency's service delivery model that we should really dial in on. I think to your point about the workshops, the way that this moves from, that we've designed this from phase 1 moving into phase 2, phase 3, is that we'll take a broad view and conversations with the agency leadership and supervisors as a whole, set the vision and as we've said, the North Star for both the project and the agency coming out of this transformation initiative. And then we move into each of those functional areas. So the workshops are going to be focused in on that, the folks in the organization dealing with the service delivery and capital program management, dealing with the budget and finance for the agency, providing the resources to it, dealing with the folks in your IT organization to understand the technology strategy, what applications exist today, what might be on the roadmap from their perspective, but to really go from a wide perspective to focus in on each of those 4 work streams. And then ultimately, as we start developing recommendations that can be actionable for the organization, to come back out of it, again, integrate the findings across the 4 different work streams and tie it all together. This is admittedly, as we've said, it's aggressive, but this is a timeline that that each member of this team has worked within before and is used to producing results. And I think the evaluation committee did a good job of challenging our thinking on this area. And I think ultimately we reached a level of comfort that this is achievable and we can deliver on the board's expectations for the RFP. And I'd invite the team to jump in there if there's anything else they'd like to add.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would say, Chris, is you notice there over the left first deliverables, a project plan. So having said all of that, we hear your concern, we understand, and so when we go through phase 1, which is planning and visioning, the planning piece, really, if we need to screw up or make an adjustment there, that our thinking is we would do that as we finalize that project plan to make sure we've got the plans right to do the proper analysis, make sure we've got actionable recommendations, the roadmap is implementable. I mean, all these things this is the most important thing for us. So if it's going to take a little bit more time, then we'll catch it there. And the planning step is the way that. So I just want to reflect that. I hear your concern, and frankly, we understand.
Okay, well, thank you. Again, I'm just more interested in making sure we get a quality product. So that's where my concern is.
And before I turn it over to Mr. Suarez, there were a few items that had already been done by staff. For instance, the compensation study, the MOS contract. So there were a few things that were automatically taken off that had already been accomplished. So I think that helped, Chris, wouldn't you say?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point to include a couple of those other things in the budget and finance work stream as well. I think fall into that category. Yes, ma'am. I think Rob made the point that that I didn't make, but should have in my opening remarks, which is upfront. The first deliverable that you'll see from us is that work plan that's going to be informed by the data that we receive and the interviews with each of you. So that's the opportunity where we'll all have the level set and calibrate and say, is this the right plan and timeline to deliver value to DCTA?
Raymond?
I'd just like to add that from a timing perspective, this is the best time to do this. We have a triennial review that's going to be kicking off, which is a very extensive, thorough audit, if you will, from the FTA that kicks off at the beginning of the year. We have a lot of things that are kind of teeing up for early next calendar year. And we've given a lot of thought from staff's perspective, and we've done a lot of work over the last 18 months. That I hope that will help Accenture and Cambridge and the rest of the team quickly take the things that we've done, but also the scans of mobility is pretty well understood of the technologies and the platforms that are available in the industry today. And I think there's some other transit authorities that have gone through similar processes that will hopefully facilitate some very good strategic discussion. I believe that staff is very much in line with the board with regard to innovation and some of the areas that we've been looking at. So we're very hopeful and excited that in a 12-week period that we can actually bring these concepts together with your help and really chart a path forward. I do agree that 12 weeks is aggressive, but I think with your expertise and all the horsepower that you're bringing to the table is going to really help facilitate taking a lot of these ideas and really knitting them together into a strategic path forward.
Mr. Gilmore?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Quick question for the team. How are you going to whittle down the
Froze up on us, DJ. Hold on one second.
Can y'all hear him? I'm having some issues. Okay, so it's not on my side. Okay.
On our side.
It's revenge of the background, I think.
Yeah, no, he's still frozen. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I can't do anything. Yeah, because everybody else is fine, and he just jumped off. He's probably gonna try to log back in.
I guess one of the other areas that would be good to just kind of talk about or just have in mind is that we are a regional player, and we do, we want to make sure we're looking at how things affect our relationship and technology and all that with DART, just to make sure that I think that a goal that has been asked nationwide is a desire to have a seamless situation for our passengers to be able to know that they can get off one platform onto the other. And so we want to make sure that, and I can see us having more interaction with DART, that we want to make sure that it is a seamless process for our riders going into other areas with our other agencies.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I think that's a great That's a great point, and it's something that we're sensitive to. I'll just make one comment and then invite Dahlia to offer any thoughts she might have there. But I think whether you're talking about DART or any of the partners that you've executed contracts with, mobility contracts with, if you take the rider's perspective, they're somewhat, I think, ideally indifferent to the specific agency that they are interacting with. Ultimately, they're trying to get from their front door to the doorway of wherever their destination is, whether that's to visit a friend or a family member, or go to work, or carry out an important errand for their day. So I think opportunities to create or orchestrate that seamless experience is kind of the perspective that we're bringing, starting with the riders that exist today and those that the agency could bring to the platform in the future, and working back from there from an experience perspective. Dolly or Scott, is there anything else that you wanted to add to that?
I mean, yeah, it's a great point. And we do, in addition to the nuts and bolts of how the individual services are operating, we do want to take a look at that customer experience and what can be done to help to improve that and make that a bit better. And so looking at not only, coordination of schedules and making sure services connect, but thinking about how individuals actually pay their fares, making that really easy, how they get the information, how they plan a trip, how they pay for a trip. And if DCTA is looking at some of these innovative models around mobility as a service or integration with TNCs or anything like that, how do we integrate that with a wider mobility provider provision in the region? So absolutely what we want to look at.
Thank you. I think we have TJ back.
And Claire has her hand raised.
Okay. TJ.
I think Claire was going to cover for me.
TJ, if you can go, you're on.
So in the technology piece, Zoom is garbage. Please don't recommend it. Moving on.
Noted.
So you're talking here about stakeholder interviews, and I just want to make sure I understand your process for capturing that information and making sure that because you're likely to get 5 very different opinions or conversations. As you know, the board here has not been a full entity. It was recently reconstituted, so there's been a lot of change in this organization. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about your process and how we'll know that you are capturing all 5 of the board's input. Because quite frankly, I'm interested in hearing what the rest of the board members want to say, and I want to make sure that that's clear.
I'll take first stab at this. TJ, is your question partly about how we will report out to you the findings from the interviews and the key themes there, and how we'll reflect that we've captured the input of each member of the board?
Yeah, and we can even extend that further into your general reporting. That I don't want to filter. I want everything that you're bringing straight to the whole board.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So yeah, we can expand that a little bit more, Chris. Thank you.
Okay. Brandy, I think that's a good opportunity to move to the next slide as we respond here. So first, TJ, I think we'll in the planning and visioning phase, we'll finalize the reporting format, cadence, and the venue for the reports that we make to staff and the board. But typically what we're used to doing and what we're assuming will be a good starting point, the design here, the final design of the reporting, is that we would provide weekly status updates for the agency on what's been accomplished in the preceding week, what's planned to be accomplished in the next week or 2 weeks, and any initial observations that have been made in the intervening period. We believe that, Brandy, are you able to advance to the next slide?
She had to take an emergency break.
Okay, no worries. So whenever we slide, it just presents our initial thoughts on project governance as well as reporting. So, you know, the day-to-day governing body to keep the timeline moving in our experience typically relies on a point of contact for logistics and access to staff and facilitating different discussions as well as with the board. For example, coordinating over the next 2 weeks these individual interviews with each member of the board and the executive leadership. There we go. Great. Thank you. So I think there'll be regular reporting. Like to hear eventually what the board's thought process is around the constitution of the steering committee. Obviously, the board is the overall sponsor of the project and the prime mover here. But to keep the process moving, I think a group that includes a day-to-day point of contact with your team on the staff is going to be important. But you know, we intend for our findings and our work, and staff has reiterated this as well in our conversations leading up to today, that the reporting will be as frequent as is meaningful to the board. We're prepared to do that on a weekly basis, and should the board like us to come once a month or on a more frequent basis to deliver a status report as part of one of your regular meetings or a special called meeting, we're ready to do that as well. Does that answer your question, TJ?
Sort of, and maybe if I can give you some perspective from my side, Chris, that maybe help you. In my opinion, and I think this is correct, but it may not be. I just want to be clear that this is a board-directed process. And that we may, as a board, need to have some group decisions to give direction to you guys. What I want to make sure that is clear is that, you know, that we're seeing and giving that direction as a board.
Yes, absolutely. That's the assumption for the entire programming of the model and the approach, TJ. So.
And TJ, if I could add, we have slated a discussion item for every single board agenda moving forward to specifically address the transformation initiative. And so as the weeks, we have made available to Accenture the Friday emails that go to the board, the dates of the monthly board meetings, as well as if the board directs that there needs to be a specially called meeting to discuss something specific, that we have the flexibility to do that as well.
Does Claire still have her hand raised?
No, she does not.
No. Okay, next.
She was my Zoom workaround.
There's going to be a very insightful question from a Trinity Tiger. Okay, Madam Chair, should I just proceed with this slide? So I think we've.
Uh-oh. Chris is frozen now.
All right, Robert. Take over.
It looks like Chris froze.
Robert
left.
Is TJ frozen? Or just being still? No, he's not frozen.
I can't tell whether it's his digital self or his real self.
Okay, are there any other of the partners that would like to fill in for right now?
So I think Rob is also frozen. Can you hear me? This is Perry.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so I think Rob is also frozen, but I think like other Accenture projects, we actually use a partnership model to implement all of our projects. And what that means is we work hand in hand with you as a team, and that team is both board and staff. As you can see in the tower to the right, we have a full understanding of the fact that this will be a yin and yang. So there will be board roles and staff roles that we will be balancing in the context of this engagement. And Rob, over to you. Are you really back?
I'm back. Sorry, I got
okay, great. You can
kicked out
pick it up from here.
Yeah, I guess it doesn't like me either. TJ, you shouldn't feel alone, I guess. Anyways, yes, no, I'm back. So this, I'm sorry, Perry, I'm not sure what comments you made here.
All I said was we work as a partnership, and nodded my head at the issue that was raised earlier around the need to be interacting with both board and staff. That's all I said.
And Rob, I'll just jump in and say that the approach that we've laid out is really designed to take you through the life cycle. So we'll have a checkpoint with you around the vision. We'll have a couple checkpoints with you around the current state. Then we'll go into recommendations and so forth. So it's not like we're going to do anything like jump straight into recommendations. So we've designed this to be very collaborative with you.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, I think, and we've touched on the key observations. I mean, one thing that we suggested during this process of putting the model together is as we start having observations, things that strike us, things that really we don't need to put it through due process. We really just need to kind of raise some insights that we're getting up front. We're going to do that for y'all, so that those are going to come through in those Friday packages. And so that was one of the things that we thought we could do to sort of help bring additional value. I mean, obviously there's a lot of expertise here on the team. And so typically in my experience in doing many of these, you start running into things pretty quick. And you got to work through it, make sure you do it right and get it into recommendations and a roadmap, et cetera. But observations are not to be mistaken for findings and recommendations and all of this, but they are things that we're seeing. And we during the process, we did suggest that we bring those forward. And I think the board package every week is how that's going to show. So, if there's differences in kind of board views, et cetera, we'll certainly bring those forward. I didn't get a chance to touch on the previous slide, but the programming of the overall approach kind of assumes that. That's pretty common to have kind of different views on things. Everybody's got their own point of view, frankly, and that's good. So we want to kind of draw on that as a strength, and the project's really designed to kind of work through that sort of systematically to make sure we as we set what the future state needs to look like, where you are now, and how to go about implementing sort of transform DCTA. We certainly are going to be drawing from those different points of view to do that. So some of the workshops are intended to help kind of square up. I know I may be over addressing this a little bit, but I want to make sure that I reassure you that we thought about that in the overall approach. All right. So Chris, I don't know, is he back on this?
He is, yes.
Okay.
Hello. Can you guys hear me okay?
All right. So,
Yes.
Chris, I think we've kind of beat this horse here. So this one, I think, is probably covered now in terms of governance. Let's the board or the executive have any other questions on this.
Okay. Then one final point I'd just like to make on this slide, and I think this is a challenge that we've just experienced one example of. In the normal circumstances, we'd have the opportunity to sit next to each other in a shared working space and to not only build the relationship, which is ultimately about building trust with each other, which leads to better project outcomes generally, but it also presents an opportunity for ad hoc conversations that can reveal some insights. So I think we'll be looking to work with the board and the staff, particularly in the next 2 weeks, to really work around the virtual constraints that we have, to make sure that we have the right cadence and access and level of trust built up with the board and the team on the staff to advance the work crisply. So hearing the joint conclusion that we have addressed this completely, why don't we go ahead and move on to the next slide. Okay, So on this slide, and I'm not going to drain this, y'all, but this is a couple of examples of the information that we'll be seeking and the work that we'll be doing over the next 2 weeks. And what this is really all about is getting an intimate understanding from each member of the board and each member of the executive leadership team about the perspective that each of you has on the agency, on the opportunities and obstacles for this project specifically, and really allowing us to build, as Dahlia said earlier, a fact base, so that ultimately as we move through the project, we not only have the benefit of the data that will drive not only the conversations, but ultimately development of actionable recommendations that are practicable and feasible for the agency to implement as you move out of this initial 12-week phase. So we've submitted our request for individuals that we would like to interview to staff, along with the different data elements that we would like access to, and reports and different documents that we would like to review in this first 2-week period. So these next 2 weeks are going to be all about introducing ourselves to each of you, giving you the opportunity to introduce yourselves and your perspective as leaders of the agency to us through one-on-one interviews. And we will be diving into the data as staff turns it around for us. And both of those things are going to be inputs to the visioning workshop that we'll be driving towards, as well as the project plan. So as I said, I'm not going to drain this. You can see this. We have 2 slides in the appendix that represents the initial data request that we made of staff. 2 final observations or comments I just want to make here, and again, the team should feel free to jump in and cover off on anything that I may omit. But number one, it is the very, very rare client of ours that has reports or data that responds to everything that we ask for. It is just fine if a data set or a report doesn't exist, or if it would take a high level of effort to create a custom work product or report. For us, we're not asking staff to spend cycles trying to produce something that responds to our request, because oftentimes we're able to get the information that we need to provide value to you through other means than just a data request. And interviews are a great example of that. And to the extent that that data that we've requested already exists online, either on the DCTA's website or another agency's website, sending web links is just fine with us. We're not asking for everything to be in an Excel file, etc. But I think we've given staff, and this is another area that we talked through with the evaluation committee, how we can work given the day-to-day responsibilities that each member of the team has to keep the agency running, along with any particular limitations that DCTA might have regarding systems and data availability. So with that, I'll pause and invite any other comments from the team or questions from the board or staff, if there are any.
I don't see any questions.
Okay. Okay, great. And I think we can move on to the last slide here. Okay, so I'll make a few initial comments on the next steps, and then I'll pass the baton to Rob. So we've included the fundamental next steps for the project as we move from today into the next 2 weeks and begin preparing and then ultimately conduct the visioning workshop. So I think having the board and staff align on a steering committee construct is going to be important, and identify who our team can rely on a day-to-day basis to help us work together to get this project done. We'll be scheduling the different activities for the planning and visioning phase. Those include the interviews, getting a marker down for the visioning workshop, and then scheduling status update meetings. The team, as I said, and Nicole indicated already, that the team is preparing to respond to the data requests that we've submitted. Once we receive that, we'll begin our analysis right away for each of the work streams, and then the deliverable besides the visioning workshop for this initial phase is the project plan that will include input from the board and the staff that we will present to you for approval. Rob, you want to close this out?
Yeah, no, thanks, Chris. And again, the project plan being kind of the deliverable there to make sure things like timeline and all this have been brought up so far. We'll make sure if we've got to make any tweaks that we'll do that then. Just to close out, I mean, I thought I'd reflect on some kind of, keys to being successful here, just based on our experience, and just kind of, touch on 3 or 4 things. We understand that, there'll be lots of different points of view. Certainly we've talked about it already in terms of board members, et cetera. One thing is we are going to be working towards an alignment on vision. And so that's, we've got a work session with you to do that. We're going to help obviously facilitate that. Making sure that, the respective project roles and in the timeline that we stick to that and we understand the roles. I think we've got a good kind of working understanding now. We'll certainly refine that as we need to as we go through this planning step. I think, points of contact for the board and the staff certainly are very important. We know everyone needs to have a voice and will participate and help shape this. But I think getting that board sort of point of contact, just if nothing else, to help us administratively and work through the process with you and have that central point of contact to do so is going to be important. So I want to make sure, just call that out. It's subtle, but it's a significant thing, certainly in a project where we're going to work through a 12-week schedule with you. Obviously, given the 12-week schedule, there'll be pretty active ongoing engagement with key staff leaders. Again, we're going to be working together on this. This will be co-created by us, if you will. And so just making sure, and I think we've already talked about this a fair amount, but that level of activity certainly, and making sure that we're just prepared for that is critical. I think for the reporting format, making sure we've got that right for you, the cadence and the venue. We certainly got the report, I think, set up, status and observations, et cetera, for a weekly cadence on Friday. If there needs to be some other kind of cadence or reporting format, et cetera, again, back to a board-led initiative and project, we're happy to do that. Obviously, want to capture that as soon as possible. So, some fairly fun, basic stuff there, but I want to make sure I just kind of touch on those things because I feel like those are, pretty key and merit just reflecting on. Sorry, was there a question?
Yes, Rob, I just want a clarification, and whether that's from you or from Chris. But the weekly reporting was part of your original planning, that your weekly planning, your weekly report would be like a written detailed document that can be shared with the board. You guys would send over a PDF. We would just share it in a Friday board email. But based on the findings of each weekly report, y'all may make the recommendation that we need to have like a specially called board meeting to talk about specific topics to get further direction, correct?
Chris, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Nicole, that's right. I think you nailed it. As Rob was describing earlier, we have ultimately the recommendations that we'll make to the board as part of the project are going to be, fact-based, grounded in data, and practicable to be executed. And if there needs to be formal action taken by the board that we've seen to address an opportunity that might be particularly timely, then we'll make that recommendation to conduct that type of meeting. But the other thing that I think you can expect to see in the reports is frequently, as we go through our work, particularly in the initial phase, there may be observations that we will make that we will feel warrants reporting those out to the board. So not as completely baked as a formal recommendation, but still material to raise to the board's attention in the event that the board would like to assign either us, staff, or to dive deeper into understanding what the observation is and any opportunities that there might be to unpack that further.
And then I think based on those reports that are provided on a weekly basis, that if an individual board member felt that they would like to have board conversation about any of those findings, then they could just request into Brandy that they would like to have a specially called meeting, and we could conduct that at that time.
Absolutely.
TJ?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This item 2, I don't think you need a board contact. Staff can schedule. We have, to Nicole's point, we have a monthly, and that needs to be an action item, Nicole, not just a discussion item. So that if there's a vote required, then we need to do that. Staff can provide the data requests. Staff can provide the meeting scheduling. If there needs to be individual outreach, that's fine, but I want that documented and brought back to the entire board as a whole. But I have a concern with a single point of contact from the board. I want you guys independent, and I want you guys bringing information completely to the board.
Thank you, TJ.
Okay, yep, duly noted.
Okay.
And TJ, we'll move that the transformation item to an action item for all the future meetings. And I think one of the roles that staff can play as well is in reviewing those weekly reports. We can kind of put together like a high level document that goes out in each monthly board packet that says these are the things that we specifically want to talk about based on those weekly reports. And then if there's anything that board members would specifically like to talk about, they can just reply to Brandy, let Brandy know what those things are, and then we'll add that to that list for discussion and any action that's required.
I think that keeps everybody at arm's length and does a much better job of keeping everything clear.
Totally agree.
Understood.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from the board? Okay.
If there are no questions from the board, I just kind of want to reiterate that our next step after this is that Accenture has provided us with a list of the entire board. So that's voting members, non-voting members, as well as alternates. And so Brandy is going to be working to schedule one-on-one meetings with each of the board members with Accenture. The only meetings that will not be one-on-one is for the voting board members. We're going to have the voting board member and the alternate together in the same meeting with Accenture. So Brandy will be reaching out to get those scheduled as soon as possible. Accenture has requested to meet individually with DCTA executive staff as well as department leads or department heads. And so we will be scheduling those as well. And then we have already started, based on the list of data requests that Accenture has requested, we've already started to pull data, and we will be sending that over as available.
So these meetings, we need to make sure what we're looking at as far as a quorum.
Yeah, because I will have to post if all voting board members, if we're going to have a quorum of voting board members, I'm going to have to post 72 hours before that meeting, and which makes it open to the public.
But there's no more than 2,
right?
Right, it would just be the voting member and their alternate.
Okay, I thought you were saying all the voting board members would be.
No,
Okay, perfect.
so for example, like it would be TJ, Claire.
Claire, got it.
Accenture.
Okay, good.
Yep.
Perfect.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? So thank you, Nicole, for giving us that update on our next, what happens next. So it sounds like we've got a plan. We're going to be busy. That's exciting. And we'll have some good results. I'm confident. Okay.
And then just for the board's information, I will be acting as the point person for Accenture. And so I will be getting them, any of their requests will be coming in through me, and then I'll coordinate with DCTA staff in order to coordinate any of their needs.
Well, members, thank you so much. Yes, we had a few glitches, but I think overall it was a great meeting. I think it's given us a lot to think about, talk about, and it seems like I feel a synergy of excitement moving forward, and we'll see in 12 weeks where we are.
All right.
Thank you so much. So
Thank you.
motion to adjourn. Second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 The meeting is adjourned at 9:54. Thank you so much. Have a great weekend, all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks,
you
everybody.
all.
Okay, bye-bye.